I went to Portland this weekend and I attended a panel called We Need to Talk About Diversity with James Damore, Peter Bokhosian, Heather Hying, and Helen Pluckrose, with Brett Weinstein introducing the panel. And there were a couple of low-level rudenesses that occurred. Somebody ripped out the plug of the audio station. It feels like with the whole James Damore situation is like we are at a brick wall. Like there's this entire house that we need to go into as a society and start to figure out and explore together and have discussions in the parlor and the billiard room and the withdrawing room and the bedrooms and the kitchen and all that stuff. We need to figure out this whole house, but we are stuck in the freaking foyer. And people are yelling and screaming about how we are not supposed to go into the house, how gender is just a construct or whatever, or even bringing up maybe that there are pressures that are not just social pressures. Maybe there's not just this omnipotent patriarchy that's ruining everything and forcing us into all these stereotypes, which itself is a stereotypical freaking criticism of the entire conversation that it just blocks us from proceeding forward. And it felt like we are unable to enter into really looking with nuance at the different pressures that are compelling all of us as embodied beings who are brought here through a tremendously long strain of different sized body parts rubbing against each other to produce more different sized body parts that are rubbing against each other, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to ask a question. I did not ask a question in the Q&A afterwards, but I'm going to ask my question and I'm going to start to try to figure out how to answer it. And I very much welcome any and every one of you to comment and reply and tell me what you think about this. Let's set up a hypothetical. Let's say that there's this big old company. It's a huge company. It's very successful. It's very busy, right? So there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of activity happening in this company. And this company has a lot of different parts in it. So let's just shake this company up and let's pretend that this company is in a snow globe and that every little snowflake is an individual. Yes, and every single individual is perfectly unique. But all those snowflakes drift down. And let's zoom in to 2 rooms in this huge company. There's this server farm over here, and there's a daycare over here. And it just so happens, for the sake of argument, that 9 out of the 10 people that work in the server farm are men. 9 men, 1 woman in the server farm. And it just so happens, for the sake of argument, that in the daycare, there are 9 women and 1 man. And it just so happens that the 9 men working in the server farm create a collective culture. There's this emergent culture that's nobody's fault. It's just an emergent culture. And it skews masculine and it skews geeky or whatever. So there's something going on in that server farm, a cultural kind of manifestation. But at the same time, there is a cultural manifestation that emerges in the daycare with those 9 women. Now, there are 2 levels to this argument. One is that there's the type of work that is going on in that server farm. It's a very particular type of work. And it takes a particular sort of mindset and frequency of activity to get that server farm to act correctly or to operate correctly, right? Just as in the daycare, there is a particular set of skills and needs and activities that need to be performed, which create its own influence on how the different employees of the big company operate. Now, there's this person up in HR. Let's just pretend that this person is a she, and I'm going to use the female pronoun. And the female employee at the HR department doesn't just want to ensure the company against liability. She's not just there to protect the company. Let's be generous with her. Let's say that, yes, her primary goal is to protect the company, but above that, she actually wants to make this company a healthy work environment that people love to work at. Like, she really cares about the company. She really cares about the job. And so she looks at these 2 different departments and she sees that there is this dynamic in the server farm. And maybe it's part projection, but partly she notices that the woman is acting as though she's kind of the odd man out. At the same time, that one man in the daycare, he's acting like he's the odd man out too. Now, the HR person, for the sake of argument, she says to herself, I don't want to just change the 9 men in the server farm, but I want to give tools to the one woman in the server farm that will help her fit in better with those 9 men. I want to affect the entire culture there, so I will also provide tools for those 9 men to be more inclusive to the female. And this HR department person also wants to do the same thing at the daycare. Now, it seems like the whole conversation right now about the James Damore memo is about that skewed ratio in the tech industry. The big thing is that women are just as able to work in tech as men, and any suggestion that they're not, even suggesting that they're not interested as much as men are in this sector, it bars us from even discussing why. And if we can't get beyond that, then we can never actually get into a discussion of how those 9 men can possibly not just change their behavior, not just stop being sexist, but all those people in that environment be more understanding towards each other and be more understanding of the differences that brought them there, and then the differences that can not only give rise to tension, but give rise to a beneficial work environment. And I think that the same manner of questioning needs to be applied into the daycare sector. Do we want men in the daycare sector? I think we do. I mean, this is somebody who worked in the daycare sector for 16 years, so at least a decade and a half. I worked in the daycare. And in my own experience, it was kind of cool to be the odd man out, right? It was kind of, at the same time, though it was cool to be the odd man out, I did feel some societal pressure to not be a guy in preschool, right? It was kind of weird. I had to get over that. It's like, oh man, why am I a man in daycare? There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my life that I ended up here, and I should get out and I should go get a real job, right? And the only reason that I stayed there, well, there's a number of reasons that I stayed doing that work, but the main reason is because I had very direct, persistent, positive feedback in that job. That job allowed me to learn a lot of things that I needed to learn in order to develop as a person. It did not give me hardly any monetary remuneration. And that's one of the main reasons why you're not going to find a lot of men in daycare, because there's an expectation, both internally and externally, for men to make a certain amount of money, right? And that for whatever reason, that's how it is. And we can go and argue whether that's good or bad or right or wrong or whatever. Or we can go into question, well, how do we make daycare not only something to afford to get for your child, but something that you can afford to do as a livelihood? Like, there's a whole nest of questions that come to the fore when we look not just at these high-profile jobs and not just look at man as the standard bearer of what it is to be a human, right? Or what it is to be a professional is the businessman, is the king, is the powerful, CEO. There's this very frustrating double standard that I guess we can go into or just completely skip over, but there's this very frustrating double standard where we perceive only that which is enviable about men and then shut down any sort of nuance when it comes to tearing down the stereotypes within a high-profile job, but do nothing, completely overlook not just the steel smelters and the garbage men, but look into education and what makes it good for a man to be a preschool teacher. What does a man give to 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds that they're not going to necessarily get from a woman? And if we can't even get into the conversation that men and women are not allowed to be different at all, we can't even start to look at how they are different and how those differences, one, give rise to tension, but two, give rise to something that's actually beneficial for humanity. And I just want to put in a plug for male daycare workers that there is something to be said about a man interacting with 2, 3, 4-year-olds that will prepare those 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds for life, to be strong, to have integrity, to have a sense of authority, to have a sense of respect, to have a sense of their own value, their own strength. And of course, not to say that a woman cannot provide those things, but within preschool, there is going to be certain triggers that are going to work on the brain of a female that are going to give rise to more motherly qualities. And I think that we can start to do studies about this and watch and see how women interact with children and how that might have certain neurological bases that we can't necessarily get away from, because every single one of us were born out of a long lineage of mothers protecting children and fathers providing for the mothers and children. If we can't accept the stereotypes as stereotypes, but rather see all stereotypes as evil, then we can't really see how those stereotypes not only inform generally how we behave, but also how we can start to tweak those stereotypes. If we can't approach these large, low-resolution pictures of the environment, then we can't actually start to see where that resolution starts to get interesting, starts to get more detailed, starts to get actually more full of possibility for actually making our society a better place. And that's kind of what I have to say about this. I am going to link the full Q&A in the description down below. There's some good questions. There's some great answers. Especially Heather you can really start to see her advancing the discussion in a way that I'm not able to do, and in a way that I think is actually burgeoning with possibility for all of us to start to kind of get down the road of figuring out how to interact with each other as different people in a very complex environment. And because, I make my bread and butter from taking apart weirdness, I will encounter and riff on one little weird question that came at the very, very end of the Q&A, which wasn't actually a question, but here it is.
I'm hoping to have a panel with you and Mr. Daimler, if you're available. It would be awesome to have a real diverse panel in a circular fashion where there's not this power. You guys are high, you have microphones, we don't.
This lady asked for a real diverse panel where everybody would sit in a circle and it wouldn't be a hierarchical formation. And then Peter asked her if she was a part of the genders and women's study division of the college. It's not called a division, but you guys understand what I mean. And she's like, well, no, I studied here a long time ago and I've been studying on my own. And it really seems like somebody who went through gender and women's study would have a problem, first and foremost, with a hierarchy and would want to make this cellular-like forum where everybody's sitting in a circle and everybody's on the same level and there's no amplification and there's no hierarchy. But I have to say, whenever somebody starts any sort of group activity, by beginning that group activity claiming that there is no hierarchy, that we're all on the same level, they are just putting hierarchy underneath the human interaction. They're making it one step removed, which makes it that much more difficult to interact with and to keep accountable. That's what happens. There's never going to be a human situation or any human situation that's actually going to move forward. That's going to be a communication of ideas without somebody having more authority or more expertise than another person, especially in a forum where people are going to go to. You're never going to draw a crowd by saying, we're going to go have a talking circle about gender in the park and everybody's going to get 20 minutes to say everything that they want and there's going to be no order so we can all talk over each other. It's not just a fantasy. It's not just a fantasy, a utopian fantasy to create this non-hierarchical activity. It's not. It's actually a way to hide and to cover over any given hierarchy. It's a way to stuff authority away, but that authority is still going to be there. So that's the one thing that I'll critique for you. And other than that, here's a cat. Have a good night.